The growth of the internet and the World Wide Web over the last 20 years has seen massively improved access to hardware, broadband and wireless, alongside mobile technologies. New social media platforms are developing at rapid rate, and this has fundamentally and irrevocably changed the landscape of human interaction and our culture of communication and information exchange. And this is impacting, certainly in the UK, very heavily on perceptions of how we should be discussing archaeology in a public arena and how we want to invite public interaction back into archaeology, certainly in the light of, as I will talk about in a second, our funding crisis in the discipline within the country. My research at the UCL Centre for Digital Humanities is concentrated in 4 main areas of UK archaeology. Just a couple of illustrations here. I'm looking at commercial archaeology, which is developer-led archaeology, stuff that goes on in advance of housing developments and so on. Looking at community archaeology, so local volunteers that are working in public archaeology groups. Local authority archaeology, so heritage or historic environment records often have a public archaeology element to their work alongside their planning side of things, and also universities that are doing some kind of public outreach work. I'm looking at these 2 discrete areas, as I was just mentioning before, so looking at how museums, archaeology groups and so on are presenting their archaeological work to the public through the internet, whether that's on a website, as you can see here from the Museum of London, but also on Twitter, Facebook, blogs, Vine, Tumblr, whatever. And also looking at the more common networking stuff that goes on through these platforms, such as Bone Commons, which we've got here, which is a zooarchaeological discussion forum where people share information about their finds within the profession. So these are sort of rather more closed-walled networking places for people to meet. Archaeology in Britain is in a pretty precarious state. The discipline is suffering horrendously from the austerity measures of the coalition government that we have at the moment. There's been significant financial challenges across the board. We are seeing a 30% decrease in our historic environment record staff. So these are the people who are monitoring developments from the planning position within local authorities. Our National Heritage Board, I suppose the equivalent of you lot, English Heritage, has just been sliced like a salami over the last 5 years, and we are now in a position where it's been broken in 2, and they're looking at being paid off with an £80 million goodbye package from the government. There are massive impacts of the raise in student tuition fees, which I apparently don't have in Sweden, but lucky lot. So students are not being attracted to archaeology as much as happened in the past, which is then impacting on the ability for archaeology departments to maintain staff, maintain research projects. And we are looking in 10 years' time to have a very, very precarious archaeological situation in the UK. A massive amount of knowledge loss, and the future is going to be quite bleak. At the same time, we are increasingly under pressure to find new methods and new ways of engaging with the public because of demands from our funders for evaluated work that we can do that demonstrates that we are engaging with the public, that we're making our research relevant, and that our funding, especially when it comes from the Heritage Lottery Fund, which you may or may not have heard of, but is the biggest source of funding for public archaeology in the UK at the moment. So we're in a kind of a strange position. So actually the impact of digital technologies is quite important moving forward into the next 10 years of managing the balance between loss of knowledge and trying to create knowledge with members of the community for the people who are actually going to be funding the very small amounts of funding that we have. One thing that's very interesting to witness on the ground is the way that social media has been able to be leveraged by people, by archaeologists, in advance of some quite horrible publicity disasters, shall we say. So this is a very interesting concept from looking at the benefits of using social media as a tool for archaeological community. The site that you can see there is a site in Northern Ireland called the Cherry Mount Crannog. It's a waterlogged medieval site that was in the path of a road, a bypass, and appeared on maps going back till the 1880s. But because of some planning disasters, whether or not that was purposeful or not, they decided just to dig straight through it and allow a 6-week window for archaeologists to go in and dig. And then this is one of the richest crannog sites, richest waterlogged sites in this area that could have been fully excavated. After a massive social media campaign, this really did pick up and snowball. There were a lot of tweets about it. There was a big Facebook group campaign. There was a big publicity campaign on social media that embarrassed the Northern Ireland government. It led to traditional media picking this thing up. And from there, the archaeologists were then, because they'd been embarrassed on social media, the government allowed the archaeologists to step in and take over and excavate to a reasonable level that was acceptable to the archaeologists. The instant exposure through social media has allowed a great deal of feedback to happen very quickly and a great deal of ability to plug into traditional media very, very swiftly. So it's publicly embarrassing organisations, which is a terrible thing to say, but it works, and it's a very powerful thing for archaeology. Another thing that's happening in the UK, and is becoming increasingly common as we are suffering such horrible hits to our finances, is a growth in crowdsourcing and crowdfunding projects. We have a couple of very good examples of success and lots of examples of failure. Dig Ventures, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of this, is an archaeological field school, and they were the first real organisation to harness the idea of crowdfunding in the UK. They raised £25,000 very, very swiftly to fund an excavation at a Bronze Age site in the east of England. Other organisations have done this. We've had a Bronze Age boat recreation funded. People are attempting to fund their PhDs using crowdfunding. It's a successful exploitation of social media networks and the ability to reach people very quickly and leverage that social capital, those weak ties, connection and retweeting and reposting on Facebook. So there is a very, very big explosion of awareness about what's going on. But unfortunately, it seems to be a less sustainable approach to long-term archaeology, or certainly doing long-term archaeology and understanding the post-excavation processes may not be as attractive as producing a book, for example, or producing an excavation that you can then follow up on social media. I don't think anybody would really be interested in watching people pack plastic bags into boxes over a long period of time, so it's not fundable. But it's just something to bear in mind as a possible benefit of using social media in archaeology. I've done a lot of work on Twitter, on the sort of networking potential for Twitter in archaeology. I am a digital humanist, so that's, it sounds very niche, but that's what I do. So looking at the community creation and the community abilities of Twitter, it's not a public engagement tool, and over the past 3 years, I've done annual surveys of archaeologists and what they're using it for. And they're not using it to talk to members of the public. So this isn't a platform that's useful for outreach, but it is a platform that is useful for networking. Most archaeologists are using it for finding out information about unpublished stuff before it even hits grey literature. It has a massive reach in North America and Europe. Lots and lots of people, certainly in English-speaking countries, are using it. There's a lot of benefits for small group interaction, so very niche areas. Paleolithic archaeology, for example, has a big Twitter following. Public archaeology has a big Twitter following. And also it's used as a back channel. I understand that there's a fair few of us today that are tweeting using the hashtag. One place it does fall in is, and in fact in all of these social media platforms, is institutional policies. So how organisations can use these platforms safely and make sure that they're not publishing information that their organisation doesn't want them to, or perhaps embarrasses them and releases news before it's made available. Moving on swiftly, a project that I've been involved in, and some of you will have taken part in over the last 3 years, is the Day of Archaeology. This is a born digital project, which was set up out of a Twitter conversation, randomly. and it aims to create an online record of the work that archaeologists do all over the world. We do have participants from everywhere from Alaska to Zimbabwe, creating blog posts about their day, tweeting about it, writing Facebook posts about it. As a performance of a community, it's been great. We've created new networks through the platform. We have put people in contact with each other through the platform. So there are new research groups being set up and new combinations of archaeologists in disparate places working together. So it works really well for bridging relationships. But as a public engagement exercise, it's failed miserably. We haven't had that many people turning up to our site and looking at it and suddenly being, having a Damascene moment and deciding they want to do archaeology. So another example, perhaps, of the wonders of the potential for social media, the wonders of the potential of internet technologies for public engagement, but the reality is that actually not a lot of people are looking in these places. Internet technology is not inherently emancipatory, and we talk a lot in England about how using social media technologies and the internet and websites is going to open up the discipline. We're going to have new opportunities for people to talk to us, new opportunities for people to contribute to our records, contribute their thoughts and feelings about archaeology, identify finds, repurpose data. But it doesn't create that kind of equality just by existing. And the fact of their existence, the fact that these platforms exist and they're accessible to people doesn't actually mean that people are going to be able to use them. We've got 5.7 million people in the UK who don't have any internet access. Digital inequalities, digital literacies are things that are overlooked in the archaeological process, certainly when it comes to public archaeology projects. As Ian Hodder says, the internet is an important constituent in the fight against marginalisation. And as a public archaeologist, that's very important and a fundamental reason for me to actually want to do work on the internet. However, there is a conflicted relationship between public archaeology in practice and authority, and our archaeological authority and our expertise in managing that and protecting that, and whether we want to protect our archaeological expertise. Any digital practice that we undertake that offers element of public participation and co-curation creates a problem, creates a participatory dilemma. Social and participatory media really does offer the potential to crack open the issue of expertise and share information and share thoughts and feelings and interpretations about archaeology. And with thinking post-processually, that's where we in the UK certainly seem to be aiming. And understanding how we broker archaeological knowledge and who owns archaeological expertise, who is right, who is wrong, and how these internet technologies can impact on these thoughts. But are we just really using communities and public engagement and participation as a backdrop to showcase our own innovations and our own coolness? Do we really actually care about whether the public are participating in our projects, or do we want to just have really flash projects? Are we actually interested in the process of public engagement through digital means, whether that's map making, using apps, or talking to people on Twitter? That community collaboration, that discussion is the point at which understanding, public understanding of what we do, and understanding of what we do for the public, and educational opportunities stand. Are we just interested in the final product for our reports and our evaluations and our funding bodies? So I do feel a bit cynical about this. Just briefly, the digital divide, I know in Sweden it's a very different story, but in the UK, as I said, we have 5.7 million people without any access to the internet. And it's not just an issue of being able to access a computer, it's being able to access a computer in a local library. And in Britain, as part of the funding cuts, we've had lots of reduction in the amount of libraries, so there's fewer people having internet access. We don't have great Wi-Fi, we don't have a national coverage of publicly accessible Wi-Fi. Not everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody wants to use the internet, or can use the internet, or understands how to use the internet, or understands how to use all the platforms that we provide information on. So understanding that there is a fundamental digital inequality, and building that into our understanding of the types of public engagement programs we want to create really is utterly fundamental. Now, this is quite an interesting and very UK specific, but I don't actually think that this is irrelevant. Last year, English Heritage they do an annual survey called Heritage Counts, and they were talking to people, as a cross-section of people in the UK, about their interaction with heritage, and do they go to visit sites and monuments? Do they go to country houses? Do they actually look at any type of online archaeology or any online heritage website? And do they participate in archaeological forums, discussion forums, and so on? And 1.8% of the respondents said that they did. And when you consider that on a wider scale, that there is 250,000 people in the UK that are members of community archaeology organisations, so you've got a small audience and a smaller audience, to the point where we are talking about an incredibly small number of people who are interested in our products. So with the rhetoric of mass participation and money that's being spent on large-scale digital projects in archaeology, have we actually stepped back and really thought about who our audience is? Dispositional barriers to understanding use, participation in archaeology is quite interesting. Online as off, there will always be people who want to participate and who are quite happy to step forward and take part, as much as there are people that won't. For example, Wikipedia, there's research been done on Wikipedia that shows there's a really small number of editors. About 10% of the editors do 90% of the work on Wikipedia. So you've got a position where you have lots and lots of people lurking, and people like to lurk, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's lurking versus participation, and if we're looking at drilling down into finding public engagement, places to engage with our public, we have to understand that this participation is coming from a very small and very digitally enabled group of people who probably have very good skills with the internet and probably understand what's going on a lot better than the people that are lurking and too afraid to take part, or the 1% or the 90% of people who never participate at all. A meta-analysis by a Norwegian bloke called Peter Brandtzæg has said that there is a variety of user needs and motivations for participation. So this slide is a bit misleading in that it's a bit old. I couldn't find his picture. But focusing on understanding of these requirements and the different requirements from different audiences and segmenting these audiences will benefit our investment of our resources if we can understand who is likely to participate and support and encourage that participation. We can better support public interest. 2 more slides and then I'll be quiet. One of the shocking things I found in my research in the UK was that very few organisations were actually doing any audience research whatsoever. Despite spending an awful lot of money and time, staff tears, blood, sweat and tears, creating these projects, expending amount of time talking to people on Twitter, Facebook or whatever, something like 8 projects in the UK did any work on finding out who their audience for digital projects could be, which is it's quite a shock, really, especially when they went back and re-evaluated that in the light of their findings and then were presenting that to their funding bodies, and it didn't work out very well for a lot of organisations. Finally, providing user guidelines. If we're looking to have discussions, if we're looking for interaction on our digital projects, and we're looking for people to talk to us, provide us with images, provide us with mapping data, provide us with information, oral histories, and so on and so forth, we need to be able to tell them what we want them to do, because if we're looking back at what we were looking at the slide before, the lurkers are likely to still lurk if we don't tell them what we want them to do. And the majority of organisations don't provide user guidelines. So something as simple as saying, we would like you to supply us with a photograph that is this big, in this size, in this format, and we would like you to put this metadata attached to it, would enable more people to get involved with their public engagement projects. On that note, I will stop ranting. I'm terrible cyber skeptic, so this is my contact details. If anybody wants to ask me anything more about my research or find me on Twitter, there I am. I'm coming in under time.
Fantastic, Lorna.
That's great.